Hello, and welcome to our session that is going to cover supply chain management, inventory management, and aggregate planning. Those are chapters 11, 12, and 13 in your operations management book, and this is part of the QDC1 course. So, chapter 11, supply chain management. What is important about supply chain management? One of the main goals of supply chain management is to make sure that every point of your supply chain, from the raw materials all the way down to the end product that is going to the customer, is in sync and in harmony. And the idea behind supply chain management is that if you don't consciously make an effort and use methodology and understand how a supply chain works, it is not magically going to happen. There are so many different moving parts in a supply chain, different suppliers and different expectations and different cultures, that it's not a given, even though there is a very strong business incentive for everyone to work together. Obviously, everybody's making money from each other. Um, um, it's not something that just naturally happens in terms of being the most efficient supply chain management. So there is a need to come with different ways and different philosophies of how to supply. So, what is the definition of a supply chain? A supply chain is the sequence of organizations, suppliers, raw materials, deliveries, etc., etc. Their facilities, functions, and activities that are involved in producing and delivering a product or a service. And also sometimes it's called a value chain because you wanna emphasize the fact that everybody has a value in this chain. But really, a supply chain is the big picture of everybody that is involved, really, from the uh, smallest part, getting the raw materials, all the way to a product that is located on a shelf and being sold to a customer and being used by the customer. So really, it covers everything in terms of producing a product, and not just like we've focused before on the manufacturing or on managing inventory and very specific parts of producing the product. A typical supply chain, you have, different examples. You have usually in a manufacturing supply chain, you have different suppliers, and then it goes into a storage, and then goes into manufacturing, and you have different stages of the manufacturing. So you might manufacture part of the product, and then it goes into storage, which then goes to distributors. You have the mass distributors that then sell it, then push it to smaller retailers, which then give it all the way to the customer. In a service environment, you'll have the suppliers that then you get all the supply to go into storage, and then they go into the service that is being rendered, whatever service you're rendering, and then straight to the customer. And the interesting thing about a supply chain is that it's kind of a cyclical relationship. Everybody always needs to be in contact with everybody else in the supply chain. So if you look at the last figure here, you see that you have the suppliers that talk with the production, and production also talks with suppliers, and production, which is the manufacturing, talks with logistics, which then everybody's providing feedback to everyone else in order to make sure that the system is working. And it's also why it's so important to manage the supply chain, to make sure that everybody understands what their part is within the supply chain. Supply chain management is the strategic coordination of business function within a business organization and throughout its supply chain for the purpose of integrating supply and demand management. So really, this sums up everything we spoke about so far. Supply chain management is making sure that everybody that has to do with producing and providing a service or product from the beginning to the end to the customer are all in sync, and everybody knows what they have to do, and everybody's working as efficiently as possible. So, key supply chain management issues. The the goal of SCM, or one of the goals, is to you want to match the supply to demand as effectively and as efficiently as possible. And what that translates into is that you do not want to have more supply than demand, obviously, because then you're just wasting money producing stuff that then needs to go to storage and is not being sold, and then you have carrying costs. But on the other hand, you don't want to produce, and then you have understocks. You have situations where the customer is unhappy because you're unable to provide them with the products or services, and of course you're losing money, but you're also losing reputation. So in order for you to find the perfect supply chain management methodology, you have to determine the appropriate levels of outsourcing, how much you're going to do in-house, how much you're going to do outside, and you're going to use contractors. You want to manage procurement, which is the purchasing department. You want to manage suppliers. You need to manage the customer relationship. You need to be very quickly able to identify if you have issues in supply chain and respond to them. And of course, you got to manage the risk, because there's always a price. There's no such thing as a free lunch when it comes to supply chain management. So when you decide, okay, I want to reduce costs, there's going to be some risk involved in it. If you say, okay, I want to increase quality, there's going to be a trade-off. There's always a balance in the business world, and nothing comes for free. And that's where you have to manage your risks and decide what level of risk you are willing to tolerate in terms of your supply chain. The trends in supply chain managements, they that affect the design and management is first of all, the reevaluation of outsourcing. Outsourcing was a very, very hot thing for the past decade, if not more. Tons of companies, everybody was outsourcing to India, to China, you name it, and companies are starting to reevaluate the outsourcing. First of all, we've seen tons of jokes about it, about the quality that is being suffering in terms of customer service. You get some guy in India answering your computer questions, and you can't understand the word they're saying. So obviously customers are getting very frustrated, and it comes back to hit you. But also in terms of outsourcing, it's starting to become expensive. It's not as cheap as it used to be. And when you put into the cost of outsourcing not just the labor, okay, I'm going to pay people $5 a month, great, but there's a lot of other aspects in terms of outsourcing, communication costs, delivery costs, a lot of other aspects. And when you put them all together, sometimes or recently companies have found that it's not as beneficial as it used to be. Risk management, managing the trade-offs between different supply chain management methodologies and decision and strategies. And for example, is the quality and liabilities, and for example, if you manufacture something in a third world country, and they don't have this highest standard of qualities in terms of regulations of the factories, what kind of risks are you taking by doing so? Inventory management, it's been a cornerstone of supply chain management for many years, and especially with the very popular quality methods, total quality management, and just-in-time and lean operations, where companies are trying to reduce the amount of inventory they have to the minimum they need. So in order to do that, you really have to have your entire supply chain in sync. You have to have a close relationship with your suppliers in order to make sure that you are able to immediately change and modify the amount of inventory that you need, and make sure that they are able to produce this inventory fairly quickly. Lean supply chains, just talked about it, and sustainability, which is the environment. How do you make sure that your supply chain is not ruining Earth, and that it's environmentally. Procurement is probably, I don't know, not the single most important aspect of supply chain, but definitely the top three, top two. And procurement is the purchasing department. They are responsible to sign deals with the raw material providers and suppliers that provide parts and pricing and services. And really, they get all this information from product design and from management and from production, and they have to go out there and find the suppliers and make sure that everything is working as it should be from the purchasing point of view, which is obviously very important. The goal of the procurement is to develop and implement a purchasing plan for products and services that supports the operation strategy. So it's not just about finding the cheapest product, and that's what this sentence is about. It's not just about, oh, I'm going to find a supplier that gives me the best price, which is important. But you also have to make sure that it aligns with your operation strategies. If it's quality, if it's sustainability, if it's ethical issues. Some companies just don't find it ethically acceptable to produce in sweatshops with kids, producing their stuff. So there's a lot more than just finding the cheapest supplier when it comes to procurement. Internet businesses, e-businesses, of course, that's an exploding part of the supply chain. I personally buy 90% of everything on online. I barely go to retail stores, so it's really a big part of the supply chain today. If we're talking about internet buying and selling, order and shipment tracking, how do you promote and how do you do marketing for products, which of course the internet is becoming a very, very big part of it, and information, the ability for customers nowadays to find information about your product and product reviews is amazing. I mean, 10 years ago people just could not have the same access to information as they have today. It's just amazing how quickly you can find if a product is worth buying or not and what people say about it. And that's very much changing the supply chain, and it's changing the way businesses have to react to demand and customer satisfaction. So when it comes to having supplier relationships, you can look at your supplier as a partner, you can look at your suppliers as an adversary, and obviously, I think, and the book also supports it, is that you wanna have a partner rather than an adversary, and the idea is that in the changing world that we live in today, your suppliers are so important that if you don't view them as a partner, if you don't have a good relationship with them, what would happen is that it's going to be very hard for you to run a lean operation. It's going to be very hard for you to have high quality with today's cutthroat, low price type of expectations for customers, that they want to get the highest quality possible for the lowest price possible. It's really important for you, in order for you to be able to cut those costs, that your relationship with whoever is supplying you with services is such that you're all on the same page, and they're flexible, and they understand what you need, and they understand how you work to a degree that you really can minimize the amount of management you need to do in terms of your supplier relationship. And that's why it's really important to at least try and create a relationship with your supplier where they're your partner, and not just a company that you buy from supplies, and the moment somebody with a better price comes along, you're going to change it. The bullwhip effect is the fact that small changes in the customer demand and the customer expectations can very quickly turn into a huge change in demand when you go backward. And why is that? Because, for example, if customers say, "Oh, we need," there's a spike in customer demand, which you didn't anticipate, and then suddenly you go back and say, oh my god, I need to produce more of my product. So then you say, oh, I don't want this to happen again, so you add some buffer to whatever you're ordering, and then you send it back to the previous part, and they're saying, oh, you know what, oh, there's an increase in demand that we didn't expect, we need to add buffer on top of buffer on top of buffer on top of buffer. So what happened is that the initial suppliers at the end gets this huge request, which is usually under a lot of pressure to provide, and this is something that is not positive in terms of the way you run your supply chain, but also in terms of customer satisfaction. Um, Supply chain performance matrix are different ways of how do we measure and how do we make supply chain decisions. So you have the financials, which everybody knows: return on assets, the cost, the cash flow, the profits. You want to maximize all of them, but it's not just that. You have to also look at the holistic and the bigger picture, which is, for example, suppliers, the quality of your suppliers. Do they deliver on time? How flexible they are in terms of your product, your own operations, how productive you are, what level of quality you provide, the inventory, your turnover, the average value, and also in terms of inventory, how well do you manage your inventory? How do you manage your order fulfillment? How many mistakes do you make? How many of the orders you fill on time, and you make sure that they're shipped on time? For example, Amazon is an amazing company when it comes to order fulfillment and managing operations. I've bought probably thousands of items from Amazon in the past few years, and I've never ever had an issue with them. So that's just amazing to me when you think how their supply chain is just perfectly aligned to work in a perfect delivery system. And it's not just about cost. It's not just about getting the best price. And I can tell you as a customer that many times I find myself buying stuff on Amazon even though there's a better price somewhere else on the web, but I trust Amazon so much, and I'm so happy with their service that I'm willing to pay a little bit more to buy it from them. And that's the whole idea behind a good supply chain. So what are the challenges? Barriers to integrations of organization means that two companies working together is not an easy thing. Sometimes they see eye to eye, but sometimes you have very different cultures. Sometimes it's different countries. Sometimes it's different incentives. So really, when you build your supply chain, you build the relationship that you have with your suppliers and with your customers. You have to take into consideration all the different integration points and all the different cultural and company-wide differences that you have between the companies to see how you can make sure that everybody works smoothly. You always have to get top management on board in terms of managing your challenge, and there's always a trade-off. Like I said, you can't get it all. There's always a trade-off between different decisions, and you have to make sure that you find a decision that best fits what you need. Small businesses can be sometimes a challenge when you're talking about managing big supply chains, because it's very expensive to put all these processes and all this technology, and sometimes for small businesses it just doesn't make sense. So when you decide to work with small businesses, the question is, how do you do it without upsetting both you and the small business, and make sure everybody's happy? Variability and uncertainty is like with everything in business. When it comes to the uncertainty and how variable things are in terms of demand, in terms of supply, you want to minimize it to the point that you can control it as much as possible. Obviously, you can never anticipate everything, but you want to be able to be as cost effective and as productive as possible, while trying to at least anticipate as much of the uncertainty as possible. Um, Effective supply chains, they're necessary for an organization to succeed, because if you don't have a good supply chain, it doesn't matter how great your product is. People are not going to be happy with it. If you have the greatest product in the world, but nobody can get it on time, it doesn't matter. If you have the greatest product in the world in terms of design, but your suppliers have low quality, so the end product has low quality, it's not going to work. In order for a business to be successful, it has to have a great supply chain that is following a very clear strategy, and that is built on trust and good relationships between all different ends, from the beginning to the product that the customer actually buys. Chapter 12, inventory management. So inventory management is a very important aspect of the supply chain, and it's so important that it actually has its own chapter, and there's a whole type of operations called lean operations or just in time, which is based on eliminating inventory to the point where you really have what you need. But inventory is something that can be extremely difficult to manage well, but on the other hand is a necessity. You cannot be successful without having a good inventory management, and because if you have inventory that is completely out of control, then either you're wasting storage and wasting money on inventory that you're not using or you're not selling fast enough, or you don't have enough inventory and you're really upsetting your customers. What this part of the course is going to talk about is independent demand items, which those are items that are ready to be sold or used. So they're independent means they're not dependent on other items in order for them to be sold. They're finished, they're ready to go, and you can just go and sell them. Whereas, if you look at inventory items to build a car, a lot of the items are dependent on other stuff. So the amount of wheels you're going to purchase, the amount of tires you're going to purchase for your car factory are dependent on the amount of cars that you actually build. So that's a different type of inventory, and that is something you learn when you study MRP and ERP systems. Inventory costs. So you have the holding cost, the carrying cost, which is the cost to carry an item in an inventory, and usually you calculate it for a year. So when you have an item in storage and you're not selling it and it's just sitting there, it's going to cost you money. It's not free. There's space, there's time, there's the fact that there's lost opportunities. There is a cost to holding inventory, and that's why you want to minimize this holding cost. Ordering cost is the cost of ordering and receiving inventory, right? There's a cost to that, and shortage costs are is what happens when demand exceeds the supply, and that means you're losing money, right? Because you don't have enough inventory to meet the amount of demand that the market has for your products. The way to the mathematical models in order to answer the basic questions of how much do I need to order and when do I need to order are called the economic order quantity. And the basic EOQ, economic order quantity model, is you use it to find a fixed order quantity in order to minimize the total amount of inventory cost annually that you need to do. So you want to minimize how much money you're spending on getting inventory, and you want to use a fixed order quantity. The problem with the economic order quantity is that it's in most cases it's hard to use in terms of being able to predict the true quantity you have to order, because life is a lot more complicated than what this model allows you to do. It assumes that there's one product involved, the annual demand requirements are known, and that's a very big if, being able to know the exact demands, and that demand is even throughout the year. Again, doesn't fit a lot of different situations where you have seasonal demand and stuff like that, and that I think for me the biggest issue with EOQ models is that the lead time doesn't vary. Lead time is how long it takes for you to get the inventory, and in real life that is just very hard to build a model with that doesn't take into consideration all the different things that can happen in terms of lead time, strikes, weather, you name it. Stuff that makes it longer for your suppliers to provide you with to provide you with whatever you need. And the other thing is that it doesn't take into consideration quantity discount. So if I buy more and I get a discount because I buy more, the basic model doesn't look into it. Deriving EOQ, finding the right quantity to order is based on and don't get freaked by this mathematical notation. It's very simple, and you're not going to be asked in the exam to remember these things. But what it basically says is that you look at the graph that shows you the relationship between the cost of ordering, the cost of holding, and the amount you want to hold, and you basically use calculus to find the minimum point of the graph. But forget the word calculus if that freaks you out. It's basically the root of 2 times the annual demand times the order cost divided by the annual per unit holding cost. So really what it means is that you want to find a point on the graph where you find a perfect balance between the amount it's going to cost you to hold a unit, keep it in storage, and the ordering cost that you have for that per unit. Economic production quantity applies to when you are producing stuff, and this is not about it's not like the economic ordering quantity, which is about ordering supplies and inventories. This is about producing stuff, and again, this model is very similar to the EOQ model. But here, instead of holding costs, you have setup costs, which is to set up the machines and make sure that they're ready to start producing whatever you need them to produce. And the function is pretty much the same, but again, the reorder point is answering the question. So far we saw the different ways to answer the question of how much should I order, or what's the perfect mathematical number for me in terms of how much I should order inventory. But the next question is, when should I order it? And that's called the reorder point. And the determinants of the reorder points are the rate of demand, the lead time, the extent of demand and lead time variability, so how much they change, demand, how much does it fluctuate, the lead time, how much it fluctuates, and the degree of stock out risk acceptable with their management, which means how much risk am I willing to take that I'm not going to have enough inventory, because there's always a trade-off, cost and variability. So how much risk am I willing to take? Under certainty, reorder point is when I know demand rate and I know lead time, and it's perfect. But this never happens, by the way. Never happens. This is just not a realistic model, but it's the simplest model, which is under certainty, which is basically the demand rate times the lead time. So if I have a demand of 5 items per day, and it takes 10 days for me to fill up the order, then I need to have a stock of 50 items, right? 5 a day times 10 days. Under uncertainty, reorder points, which make they make a lot more sense, because nothing is certain in life, maybe except for death. But that's where you want to have a safety stock. So that's where the reorder point equals the expected demand during lead time plus some kind of a safety stock. Question is always, how much safety stock should I have? And the amount of safety stock that is appropriate for any given situation depends on the average demand rate and average lead time. So you kind of use the averages, because that's the best approximation to what actually will happen. The demand and lead time variability, so how much variance do you have? And this is brings us to standard deviations. And the third question is, how much risk do you want to have? What's the desired level of risk you're willing to take? So when you combine these things together, the average demand rate, the average lead time, what kind of variation do they show in their, and generally if you check it over time, and then how much risk you're willing to take. And we might ask, how do I get all this information? This information is something that you get through experience, through monitoring, through using industry standards and measurements, and it's not something that you can calculate just out of thin air. You have to have some kind of experience in terms of the demand and the lead time, and then you base this experience to start calculating and help you decide how much safety stock you need. I'm gonna jump on these. I'm gonna skip these calculus and calculations because I don't think they're really relevant. But if you want to, the book has really wonderful examples of how to use these, and it's very, very simple. When you read the examples in the book, you'll see that it's very straightforward in terms of what kind of calculations you will have to do when you have the information. But of course, the assumption is that you have the necessary information, such as average demand and average lead time and average and the standard deviation, etc., etc. So to sum up what we've learned so far, improving inventory it can significantly reduce the cost and improve customer satisfaction, because when you are able to manage your inventory in a way that you have the minimum amount of inventory, so not only are you saving money in terms of how much inventory you're holding and the type of cost and energy you're spending on inventory, but also in terms of your ability to provide higher quality to your customer, which is going to make your customers happier, right? It's about the fact that you make sure that your system is efficient and lean and is focused on what it needs to do, rather than creating waste, which eventually leads to inefficiencies and leads to a higher cost in terms of producing the product. Chapter 13 talks about aggregated planning. What is aggregated planning? Aggregated planning is kind of the system view of planning the type of capacity and the type of inventory that you need. So if you're looking into inventory management from just from a manufacturing point of view, then you're focusing on the machines. You're focusing really just on the type of inventory and demand you need for a particular part of the supply chain and a particular part of the organization. Whereas aggregated planning looks to something a little bit bigger. It looks into intermediate range between 2 to 18 months, and it allows the organization to come with a plan, and that's why it's called aggregated, because it's aggregating different aspects of the business, which is not a plan which is not just focused on manufacturing. It's also focused on marketing and sales and financial issues. So it's really taking input from all different parts of the organization to create a plan that the company can follow for the next intermediate range, and also always make sure that the plan is flexible and being monitored and controlled, so it can be updated when needed to make sure that it meets the actual market demand. Why do organizations need to aggregate planning? Because, like I said, in terms of a strategic point of view, aggregation is important because you can't always predict in a very accurate way the timing and volume in demand for individual items. But when you take a more system view, when you take a step back and you look at the whole system as a big manufacturing process, it's much easier for you to come with some kind of a big plan that allows you then to break it down into the smaller parts. So really, if we were talking so far up to this point really about the smallest part, all the way down to the workstation, all the way down to the part and the inventory, the work in process, the aggregated planning goes up and tries to generate a plan that is a long, intermediate long range a plan for how we're going to and when we're going to produce whatever we want to produce. So the inputs into the aggregated planning are the production rates, the facilities and equipment, the demand forecasting, subcontracting, inventory, back orders, costs, all the different types of costs that I'm going to have. So really, in order for an aggregated plan to be successful, it needs to aggregate information from all over the company to make sure that everything that you have, all the information that you have, is accurate and allows you to really come with a plan that is feasible based on all the different elements of your production business. Now, what do you output? The output is going to be the total cost of a plan, and you're going to be able to project different levels of inventories and outputs and employment and subcontracting and back ordering. You just wouldn't be able to project. Now, remember, this is just a projection. This doesn't mean that this is going to be absolutely correct, and I mean that it's going, the future is going to unfold in exactly the same way. But on the other hand, it does get pretty close, and it allows you to, as a manager, to get the big picture and to plan in terms of what you are going to do in the next few months, rather than focusing just on the production part of how many items you need to produce. Typical planning strategy when you talk about aggregated planning is you can maintain a level workforce, you can maintain a steady output rate, you can match demand period by period, and you can use a combination of all three. So maintaining a level workforce means that you maintain the same amount of employees, basically, the same amount of resources, and you try to fluctuate your demand. You try to supply the fluctuation in demand by using overtime, using subcontractors, adding capacity when you need it for the demand. But generally speaking, you're not going to fire people every 2 months because demand changes. Maintaining a steady output rate is where you say, I don't care about demand fluctuation that much. I'm just going to have a steady production rate, and then as demand goes down, I'm going to have some inventory, and as demand goes up, I'm going to use that inventory to supply the demand. Match demand period by period. That's the supposedly the most efficient one, but it's also the kind of the craziest one, because then what you're saying is you're going to match the demand. Basically, you're going to match supply to the demand that at any given time. So that is very stressful for management, but it also requires a lot of flexibility in order for you to change your supply and your manufacturing capacity to meet the demand. But some companies can do it, and obviously it saves you tremendously in terms of the cost of holding inventory. Now, two main aggregated planning strategy. Focus on the two strategies: chase demand strategy and level output strategy. With the chase demand strategy, that output is going to chase demand. So what would happen is that if you look at B, the part B, the first graph, you see that if the capacity matches demand exactly, we have a straight line. If demand is beyond capacity, then what was going to happen is that if output is below normal, output is temporarily decreased to match demand. So what you're doing is that you are actually changing your output. You're gonna change how much your factory produces the moment that the demand is going down. And how do you do that? You can in the extreme, you can lay off people. You can have seasonal employees. Some companies hire people just for seasonal high demand, and then they let them go. Other ways is that you have people work less, or you have your machines work less, etc., etc. And the other part of chasing demand is if the demand goes up, then you're going to add employees, you're going to pay time and a half, and you're going to use your machines harder. Level output strategy is where you keep the level of output pretty much stable the entire time, but what happens when you don't have enough demand is that you're going to have more inventory, and when you have more demand, you're just going to eat into that inventory and make sure that you can meet the demand by using the inventory. So how do you? What's the general procedure to create an aggregated planning? So you determine the demand for each period. You determine the capacity that you have for each period. You identify the company departmental policies that are pertinent. Uh, uh, um, it's very important when you do a plan is to also match it to the company strategy and to the different policies that you have. So for example, if the policy is people can only work 8 hours a day, then you can come with a plan assuming people can work 15 hours a day. It's, that's not going to work. The fourth point is determining unit cost. So you use all this information, determine how much is going to cost you per unit to produce it, and then you always in business develop alternative plans and cost, kind of see all different alternatives, what different options do I have here, and then you choose the best one. Disaggregating the aggregated plan. So after you created this big plan, this bird eyes view, this system-wide plan, then you have to break it down into the pieces that will translate into actual production. How much inventory do you need to order? How much hours people need to work? How much needs to be produced at each week, etc., etc. And the way you do this is you use a master schedule. A master schedule is basic. It tells you, you take the beginning inventory, you take the forecast, you take orders that you already have in the system, and your output is the projected inventory, how much you need to order and when. The master production schedule, when and how much you have to actually produce in the factory, and the uncommitted inventory is that, inventory that you have um, left that you can go out and sell, that it's not committed, it's available to be produced and available to be sold to customers. So an MPS plan, master production schedule will look something like this, where you have your weeks, you divide the months into the year into weeks, and every week you have the forecast of how many items you think you're going to sell. Then you also have the actual orders, right? So what actually got in, which usually is different from the forecast, and you have the beginning inventory, and you start changing and playing with the numbers so everything matches. So for example, if you started with 64 units, you forecasted 30, but customers actually ordered 33, then what you have left is 31 inventory, because 64 minus 33 gives you 31. The next month you forecast 30, and customers ordered 20, but you projected inventory is going to be 31 minus 30. So because you have to have inventory for your forecast, you don't want to have a situation where you don't have enough inventory. And then the next week you have a forecast of 30, but now you only have one inventory, so you're going to have a negative inventory. Beep, that means that you need to go and make sure that you have more inventory. So this is basically what a master plan will look. This is just this just breaks down what we saw before into a table, which shows you more easily how exactly this master plan works. So available to promise ATP is the inventory that is left, that allows you to tell your salespeople, okay, go out and you can go and sell 11 more units. So that's why it's available to promise, which anybody who worked with the salespeople know that sometimes they don't really listen to it. But the idea here is that you take your available inventory and you deduct from it the customer orders for 2 weeks in this time, because you have a lead time of 2 weeks, and then you get the available promise inventory. So this is the uncommitted. This is what you can go ahead and tell your salespeople to go and sell, because even though the forecast was 30, we actually got 20 orders. So hey salespeople, go and try to get 10 or even better 11 more orders in.